Welcome back to the Mayor's Table. This is part 2 of very special episodes where our mayor agreed to allow me to interview him regarding kind of the last 8 years of accomplishments under his leadership as our mayor. Last week we focused on efforts that the mayor led and spearheaded to really reach out to and engage the public and involve the public in local government. Mayor, I thought today we'd focus kind of on some of the projects, brick and mortar projects, and some of the many things that have been accomplished in this last 8 years on behalf of our community. In fact, in many cases, in spite of extremely difficult financial conditions.
Well, before we do that, I just want to commend you on your fine job as an interviewer in that last segment. You did a really good job.
Well, the material was pretty easy to deal with. You're a good subject.
Well, we've certainly, I think by all objective standards, accomplished quite a bit in the last 8 years in the area of capital improvements. We've had a number of projects that we vetted and planned for and voted on as a council. And they've been projects that have derived out of some refunding of existing bonded indebtedness. And we had a series of bonds that we refunded in the 2012 timeframe. And then more recently in 2017, another refunding effort to generate new money to allocate towards these projects that the council had identified as being priority projects. Again, I just want to say that ultimately the decision on projects was a decision made by the elected body, but I can't begin to envision the number of hours and the amount of effort that staff put into vetting all of the many different projects that we considered. You all brought to us all the information that was necessary for us to make a decision and to prioritize all the financial information that was necessary for the council to consider in doing that as well.
Well, let me say on that, I appreciate that, and of course it's a team effort, but frankly, spending these kinds of dollars and taking these kinds of risks and investing in our community, it takes courage on behalf of elected officials who have to face their constituents, and considering the financial times that we were in, there was a lot of pressure to roll up these sidewalks, but we constantly, and our elected officials, kept the vision alive that our best days are ahead of us. In spite of economic development challenges, if we're going to have a future and continue to diversify and be a great place for people to want to live, work, and play, we had to get these things done. So that took courageous leadership, certainly on your behalf as the mayor, and of course on behalf of our other elected officials.
Well, we wanted to continue to be open for business, so to speak. Yeah. We recognize that we continue to need to provide for the well-being of our citizens, and part of that well-being is providing quality of life opportunities for our citizens. Farmington's been well known for that for many, many years, and being confronted with these difficult economic times, there probably was a basis for sitting on our hands and just trying to ride the economic wave through the cycle. And unfortunately, it really hasn't been much of a cycle. It's been a one-cycle process, I would say. We've never recovered from that precipitous drop in GRT revenue in the 2009-2010 time frame. We were down 22% almost immediately, and we've never gotten back to that high water mark. So one of the things I think that I'm proud of is that we've been able to do some of these quality of life projects within that framework of the overall economic picture, somewhat gloomy picture. We were able to do these projects without increasing taxes for the purpose of doing those projects, with the exception of the convention center renovation and expansion, which is now underway. But that was a surcharge type of a financing mechanism that's applied to those who are renting hotel rooms in our community. So to the extent that it would be considered a tax, and I would have to acknowledge that it was a tax, it was not a tax on our own citizens. It's being paid for by those from outside our community.
Yeah. Well, yes, that's right. Taxes were not raised for these projects. We have more cash reserves now than we did at the beginning of those 8 years, and have accomplished many things. And before we talk about some of the specific projects that were part of those bonds, I think it's important to remind folks that in addition to some of these major visible projects, and about 10 that we're going to try to talk about, during the last 8 years, there would continue to be hundreds of miles of water lines, sewer lines, wastewater treatment plant, upgrades to our water treatment plant, water towers renovated, restored, lots of paving. So we kept up with our primary responsibility of the main transportation and utility infrastructure, at the same time that through this creative financing method, we were able to focus on those major projects that our citizens had indicated that they wanted.
There are certainly a lot of projects that we're proud of that have been accomplished in the last 8 years that we won't talk about today.
Yeah, they're invisible and underground.
Right.
Well, let's talk about some of those before we run out of time. The first bond refinancing that took place in, as you said, about the 2012 time frame. Again, the idea there, we refinanced debt with their lower interest rates, and we're able to generate new money without having to raise taxes to fund these projects. So there's about 5 major ones. I'm going to take you through each of those and have you kind of reflect on what you remember about those and why they were important.
And just one other observation before we start talking in detail about projects. We were able to refinance this debt, create new money, without increasing significantly our annual debt service payments obligation on the general fund. That's important as well.
That's right. Money that had been carved out to invest in these projects on behalf of our citizens. So back in 2012, the biggest one that comes to mind that was so much interest to our community was the funding and construction of our brand new Four Corners Regional Animal Shelter. What do you remember about those days?
Well, I remember that that was a campaign issue in my mayoral campaign in 2010. A lot of people were very interested in seeing that a new animal shelter was built, and that the city would convert its animal control mentality to one of animal welfare. They wanted that kind of a transformation.
It was a philosophy plus a building.
Plus a building, yeah, and they really, one didn't fit without the other in many ways. So before I became mayor, the city council had done a lot of work in planning for a new animal shelter, and you're well aware of that. You were city manager for a couple of years during that time. This is during a 4-year period of time when I was not engaged in local government. I believe there was a design, there was a plan that was valued about $7.5 million. And there was a location selected, and it was up on Crouch Mesa, near the jail facility, I believe. Mm-hmm. I was approached a number of times by a number of people about what my idea was for pushing that project forward, because it was truly on the shelf.
It was on the shelf.
It was just too expensive for our taste, and there were other issues associated with it. So I took the position that if we could get the cost down to a reasonable number, and granted the reasonable number is somewhat arbitrary, I didn't know exactly what that number was, but it had to be a reasonable number. Mm-hmm. And if we could get the county to participate in funding the cost of construction based upon their contribution of animals historically to our shelter, then I promised that I would be a strong advocate, an aggressive advocate for the construction of the new facility. Well, to make a long story short, after a lot of time and effort, we did get that cost down to a manageable number. It was $4.5 million, I believe. And we did get the county to agree to participate in the construction costs, and based on their percentage of contribution to the animals to the shelter. And so those two conditions were met. As we pursued the process, we found another funding source, and that was our state legislature. Yep. As you recall, our local legislature banded together and pooled their resources, and I think they came up with $2.6 million or $2.8 million to allocate to this construction project. And the result was that we got it done. And so I look back at that and feel very proud, and I'm very fond of that project, because it was a good example of how you can get something done, and you don't have to spend $7.5 million to get a facility on the ground and operating that does the job. we found we could do it for $4.5 million and didn't lose any of the integrity associated with the project and the needs that the project demanded. So I'm very pleased with that project, and it's operating very well. We've had great results as a result, and I think that one of those results is manifested in the live release rate at the shelter compared to the old shelter operation.
Yeah, the philosophical transition resulted in incredible results. We ended up adding a veterinarian, a spay and neuter clinic, and it is extremely rare for an animal to be put down for space alone at our shelter. So the philosophy and the legacy lives on of that building. So we already talked about the complete renovation of the Farmington Civic Center that's going on, but back in 2012, part of that bond, we put $1 million towards renovating the exhibit hall.
Yeah, and I think that was very well received at that time. A relatively inexpensive project that turned out really, really good results for our community. And anymore now, people love to host their functions in that new banquet area, the exhibition hall area. And if we can, we'll maybe just move on to the expansion of that Civic Center now and renovation that's underway now. It's about a $12 million project. Yep. And again, something that's very much needed in our community, I believe. It's a gathering place. A lot of people use it. It was a 40-year-old facility, so it was time for this kind of major renovation. And the renovation and expansion is consistent with the provisions of our Metropolitan Redevelopment Plan. So I'm always happy when we can, sort of check off a project that indicates our movement forward with our planning. And this is one thing that is very much consistent with that long-range plan. And I just think it's going to be a wonderful project when it's completed and on the ground.
Yeah, every inch of that building, really inside and out, is being renovated inside and out. I would just comment that probably the biggest area of political leadership that you offered during that time was we had mentioned the funding source. Sort of, we had to impose that hospitality tax fee, what they call the convention center fee, and that was not necessarily popular. But again, it's not being funded by our local citizens, and it was the only place that money could be spent. And there was just no scenario by which that could get done without doing that. So I appreciated your leadership there.
And one of the things that I recall about that process with that first bond refinancing effort and the projects that were funded and completed as a result of that bond refinancing was that we had a divided council. I voted a lot in those days. We had Councilor Sandell and Councilor Fisher and Councilor Darnell, and who was our Councilor McCulloch? Yeah. So we were split 2-2 a lot of times, and even on these projects in that first refunding effort, there was not unanimous agreement on the projects selected or where they might be located. And I broke the tie on a lot of those votes, and particularly on these projects that included the new firehouse, fire station number 1 on Auburn Street that has been completed, the expansion of the Farmington Museum. We did not have unanimity on those projects and on the votes that led to their construction. So. I haven't voted a lot recently, but and I only voted in the case of the tie, but I was voting a lot during those days, and these projects were examples where I voted. Yeah.
There was one more project in that bond issue that was not really an exciting project, but there was a lot of concern over flooding at that time, and that a huge retention pond that sits out in front of PV High School that controls the main aurora that shoots right down in the center of town was constantly flooding, and that was also part of that project.
We did that, and but we also, I think it's important to note, we spent millions more dollars on other flood control projects that were not in the form of detention or retention ponds. Yeah. Just a lot of, I want to say $10 to $13 million in general water control kinds of projects around the city.
Replacing piping, expanding piping, and lots of... Well, let's fast forward then to 2017, where we did the very same thing again. We refinanced previous debt. at a lower interest rate, extended the terms, and had cash out to fund another group of projects that were on our long list of things our citizens want. And again, as you mentioned before, and did that pretty close within the existing payment level of the general fund. So we didn't expand the obligation of the debt fund, the general fund, in terms of its annual recurring basis. So pretty exciting projects on that. And first one, let's talk about the river trails.
Well, the riverine trail system is a signature quality of life vision for our community. It's 30 years old, I think, by now. But we recognize how important it is to our community and the recognition it gives us as a community. And so we continue to allocate monies towards expanding that project and filling in the gaps. So this $2 million that we've allocated here recently will fill in some gaps, and we'll have a continuous 8-mile trail system in one direction. So I think probably the loop, so to speak, would be about 16 miles of continuous trail system. That's pretty significant for our community.
Yeah, there's lots of more development that can be done, but this actually completes the original vision. The trail from the far west side of town out on Vista Highway all the way to the east side of town, out where the extension of Pinion Hills Bridge will be one continuous connected trail. So that's a huge one. Commend you for that, and of course all of our councilors were excited about it. In fact, all these projects were unanimous in this case.
Yeah,
this
this group of projects is really exciting.
Yeah.
And it's going to be one thing that I will regret about not serving another term as mayor, is that I won't actually be in an official capacity when they're completed. But I'm going to be paying attention to them because they are fun projects. They are game changers in some ways, and that leads me into talking about the redesign of Main Street in downtown. That planning and design is already underway. We'll actually be getting shovels in the ground probably in 2019, but has the potential to be a game changer for the redevelopment of our downtown area. And I think that with the allocation of public funds and resources, we're going to see a return in public investment, in private investment in downtown. And that's what I'm excited about. Now, this project's not going to be without its issues and its problems. Anytime you have change of that magnitude, it's going to be a management issue. So I don't envy you in that way.
We'll invite you to the ribbon cutting when it's all over.
But I do want to say I'm excited that we were able to get this project in the pipeline during my time.
Yeah. Well, another big one. You grew up going swimming at Brookside Pool. So in your time as mayor, you're seeing a major transition to that come about. Talk about Brookside Pool and what that means to you.
Yeah, so Brookside Pool is a 50, 60-year-old facility. It served out its useful life. We shut it down. It's been shut down for 2 summers now, and or maybe even 3. I can't remember how long it's been. But we've got a plan in place to replace it, and I think it's a better plan. It's not going to be a flat water pool. It's going to be a water park facility. We think it's going to draw from the surrounding area. It's going to be a tiny boost to our economic development picture, but an important one, I think. And we need to we don't want to discard ideas because they may be small impacts. They all have a cumulative positive impact, and I think this is one that will do that. It's going to be, a $6 million project, and construction should begin sometime later in the year.
Yeah, actually this spring.
We're
getting very close.
Hope we won't be in it this summer, but we should be able to occupy it in the summer of 2019. And again, I think it's a very exciting quality of life project for our community.
Mayor, there's so many other things. You were involved in the expanding Farmington Lake Recreation, opening that to swimming, funding the Boys and Girls Club expansion, the new Joint Intervention Program and JIP program, two buildings for the sobering house out in partnership with the county to approach our challenge with the street inebriety issues. They just go on and on. The Culpeper Native American Museum. It's just we could go on so long, and again, all these done without raising taxes and without increasing the recurring payment on the general fund.
Well, it's been a fun process for me to actually go back and try to think about the things that have been accomplished in the last 8 years. And again, I want to say thank you to you and all of the administrative leaders in our organization and all of the employees in our organization, because that has made it fun for me. But it is fun to go back and reflect a little bit about the things that have been done. There are many things that I had hoped to do that I didn't get done. And if we had another 20-minute segment, I could talk for 20 minutes about those things. But you win some, you lose some. In the end, you just hope that you've been a positive influence, and I'm going to walk away feeling that probably did the best job that we could. Weren't successful in all ways, but had plenty of successes. So, a really great experience for me.
Well, I will give you the last word, but I just want to point out that your 8 years as mayor wasn't the beginning of your public elected service to this community. You spent 8 years on the Farmington Municipal School Board. And then,
4.5.
For 4.5 on the school. Then you spent 8 as a city councilor in District 4. All that before you were involved in between in economic development efforts, the MRA, all that in preparation before you even became our mayor for 8 years. So you have been a tremendous leader and a tremendous community asset and citizen. I will personally miss you immensely, but we do have to look to the future, and we'll try to keep chipping away at that list of goals, as well as all the new ones that our new elected officials will have.
Well, we'll talk in our next segment of the Mayor's Table about that look forward.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for joining us for part 2 of this special edition of the Mayor's Table, where I've had the privilege of interviewing our mayor regarding an 8 years of look back at many of the accomplishments of our city through our great leaders.